The Warlord Titan legs are massive, piston-driven pillars of adamantine, designed to support thousands of tons of armor and weaponry, often featuring distinct armor and void shields, built to withstand immense firepower as well as acting as the foundation of these walking fortresses. They are powered by ancient reactors that allow these machines the ability to crush cities, infantry, knights, and even warhound titans with a single step. Brothers and sisters of the Warhammer universe, welcome back to Tortuga's Grim Rosaline. My name is Jeff, and in today's video we're going to be going over Chapter 3 of our Chaos Warlord Titan build. In this video we're going to be focusing primarily on the legs, and we're going to be coming up with that perfect action pose, as well as all of the building of the legs going up the system and all of the pinning procedures to make sure that it's enforced to hold the sheer mass and weight of a fully fabricated Warlord Titan. And I'm not going to lie, this is probably going to be the most difficult video I do with the builds, because getting the legs attached to the hip sockets and keeping everything completely balanced and even is probably the hardest thing to do with these type of builds. So I'm sure you're going to have a blast watching me go through that part of this. But before we get on to that, I need you to go down to do all those YouTube button thingies that you do so well. Click on like, share, subscribe. And now that that's out of the way, let's do this. So here's a list of all the items that we'll be using throughout this project. So here are all the items that we will primarily be using for today's build. First thing first is we always want to make sure our safety is taken care of. And for that we always need a mask and eye protection. No, not this. This is really cool, but won't be used for this. Instead, we will be using our trusty respirator and safety goggles. We want to make sure, especially using carbon fiber and resin, that none of these particles get into our eyes or our lungs. Now, to be cutting off the sprues and trimming any pieces that we do not need, as well as modifying for our fabricated pieces, we'll be using a model saw, clippers, and an X-Acto knife. Smoothing down everything, we have our nail file and Dremel. For small pieces, I always keep my tweezers on hand, and making sure to get rid of any gaps with resin, which will happen, we have Vallejo's plastic putty. For non-weight-bearing items to glue together, we will be using the BSI super glue, and for any weight-bearing, we'll be using the 5-minute epoxy. Speaking of weight-bearing, with resin, we will be using carbon fiber rods. This is a 3.0 millimeter rod that we will be drilling in and putting in. And speaking of drilling, we will have our drill, and you can see here that I have an inch taped off so that I can cut these and drill into the areas to make them more sturdy. And to hold everything together, we have our trusty Irwin grip clamps. So as you can see, we have all of our Titan parts and fabricated parts all laid out, organized, and ready to go. And now it's time for the cutting of the sprues. So we're going to start off with our clippers. Resin is very soft, much softer than our regular plastic build, so you don't have to worry about using a lot of strength to clip these off. Always make sure though that with your clippers, you're always putting the flat end towards the actual model piece when you're making the cuts. So with resin, I can always go with smaller sprues, medium sprues, and even semi-large sprues with my clippers. I've done a bunch of these enough times that I know when I need to switch over to my model saw. But for you guys, you want to make sure that you're getting good solid cuts and you're being careful not to cut off any parts of resin. So if you feel uncomfortable, just go to that model saw. With all the sprues removed, I reorganized all of our pieces, and taking a quick once over, we're making great progress. It's now time to move on to sanding and smoothing. So with this, we're not going to use our typical tools that we use for plastic. They're going to be too harsh, and they're actually going to dig way too into the resin. Instead, we're going to use a nail file, and we're going to go through all of the pieces, and we're going to start sanding off, making sure everything is as smooth as possible. Make sure there's no rough edges anywhere. Make sure there's no bumps or anything. And we're going to just start dry fitting and testing all of the connections between pieces that are going to be going together to make sure they're all fitting and locking in as best as possible. And now it's time for the fun parts. It's time we start doing the build. Starting with the feet, we're going to do a dry fit assembly. And I know I've said this several times in the past. I'm going to say it probably 1,000 times more. When you're working with resin, and I love working with resin, you need to dry fit, dry fit, dry fit. We dry fit before we glue, we dry fit before we pin, we dry fit before we start working on the pose. We always need to dry fit everything to make sure that everything fits properly, or if we need to reheat any parts and reshape them. So one of the next steps I like to do is, before I start actually gluing everything together after I'm dry fitting everything, is I start doing my initial pinning. And the hips are one of the essential places that we have to put pins. Pinning is basically putting an inch-long rod in between two joints that a lot of weight will always be putting itself onto. It's re-strengthening that area, making sure that it's not just epoxy or glue that's holding them together. So you can see here, I'm taking my drill bit and I'm putting tape about a ½ inch up so I know how far deep I have to go in when I'm making my drill points. And I'm starting with the ball socket area. I've already marked off where the middle point is, and I am taking my drill, and I've done this several times in the past, so I feel very comfortable with me holding on to pieces and being able to drill in. If you are not used to doing things like this, please use clamps or anything else to keep everything as secure as possible. I then size up my carbon fiber rod for 1 inch and cut that length off. I'll turn around and sand both ends just to make sure there's no fray areas and that it'll slide into the areas that I'm drilling into with no issues. So a trick I do from here is I will turn around and take a second rod that's just over a ½ inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch. I'll put that in when I'm trying to size up the other area to make sure they match fine, and I'll put paint on the end of that one piece. So when I press it here like I'm going to towards the hips, it'll actually leave the mark of where I'm going to drill into there. So I've now drilled both into the hip socket and the ball joints, and I've made sure that the rods will go through. Next step I'm going to do is I'm going to take my X-Acto knife and I am going to rough up the areas that the epoxy is going to be touching, just to make sure it gives that much more of a lock area for it to hold onto. So for any load-bearing areas of the Titan or any resin models that you're going to be using, you always want to use a 2-part epoxy. I like this 5-minute epoxy. This is my go-to. I will mix it for about 30 seconds, then I will apply the epoxy to both areas that I'm going to be putting together, and then clamp them down and let them dry. Now it says 5-minute epoxy, but between you and me, I always let them stay clamped for about 15 to 20 minutes. I don't like to take any chances. I want it to be as secure as possible. So we're next going to move on to pinning the lower legs to the knee sections of each of the Titan legs, and we're going to follow similar steps that we did for the hip sockets. We're going to take our drill bit that's going to be taped off at a ½ inch. We're going to cut off 2 carbon fiber pieces that are going to be each 1 inch long, sand each of the sides of the carbon fiber pieces to make sure they go smooth in, and we are going to mark off the center points of the lower legs, and we're going to start our drilling on those. So you notice while I'm drilling into each of these areas, I will start drilling in and then reverse out and clean out any of the X and resin, and then go back to continue drilling in. I want to make sure that those pockets are as clean as possible. I will then dry fit by sliding the rod in to make sure it goes in the full ½ inch with no issues. I will then take my 3/4 inch carbon fiber rod that I used earlier, slide that into the lower leg area, paint the tip of that carbon fiber, and then I will match up the lower leg to the knee socket to make sure that it marks off perfectly where I need to drill in so that everything will line up with no issues. Again, I feel comfortable with my skills here from doing a lot of different fabrications, whether it's resin or other areas, to hold my pieces against my table or anywhere and get a good solid straight drill. If you do not have these type of skills or haven't been doing this long enough, please use clamps and make sure that everything is tight and secure. Once all of the drilling is done, I will dry fit putting the carbon fiber rod into both areas and make sure that everything clamps in perfectly. I'm then going to take my X-Acto knife and I'm going to scuff up both sides of where the connectors are going to go through, and then it's going to be time to use that 5-minute epoxy. I'm going to combine the 2 pieces and mix it for 30 seconds, and then I'm going to apply it onto both sides of each of the legs areas, as well as the carbon fiber going into the holes. Once I've applied the epoxy, I will then take 2 sets of clamps and I will clamp the legs together and keep them there for about 20 minutes. So next we're going to start working on the left foot base where the foot will be standing. I decided for my Chaos Warlord Titan that I wanted it to be standing on the broken shoulder armor of a Warlord Titan from battle. So what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be placing the armor on how I want it to look, and then placing the foot on how it should be standing on there, making sure that it's going to fit perfectly. Then from there, I'm going to take the shoulder armor and I'm going to start scuffing up with my X-Acto knife the areas where the epoxy is going to be gluing to each of the pieces of the 3 shoulder armor. I will be using 3-part epoxy to glue the 3 pieces of the shoulder armor together, as this will definitely be a weight-bearing piece, as the Titan will be standing on this. After I attach 2 pieces of armor together, I'm going to put a clamp to hold it tight to exactly how I want it to be locking together, and then I will be doing the same with the other armor piece that I'll be putting on and clamping on. And again, we're going to let this sit for 15 to 20 minutes. We're next going to move on to the right foot, and we're going to super glue the 4 big toes onto the Titan foot. Now this foot is going to be firmly and flat on the ground, so when we glue these in, we're going to push and make sure that all of the toes are pressed against the ground evenly, as to not let the Titan shimmy or anything once it starts having weight on it. With the left foot, seeing it's going to be standing on the broken shoulder armor of another Titan, we need to dry fit the toes onto here and find how it's going to have the perfect stance with the toes bent so that it'll keep weight evenly on these broken shoulder armor pieces. So as you can see here, I am moving the foot around, and then once I have a good placement, I'm super gluing 1 toe at a time, and then making sure the toe fits and stays to dry into the exact angle that I want them to be in. Once that looks good, I'm going to move on to the next and do the exact same thing. I'm trying to make sure I'm not moving that foot around too much, because we don't want to have some odd angles that won't be right once we go to firmly lock this foot into place. Next up, we're going to start working on the legs, and what we're going to do is we're going to place the feet to where we think we want them to be in the type of stance, and we're going to clamp the lower leg to the upper leg against the knee section, and we're going to try to find that best pose to keep the upper hip section even and balanced as much as possible, to make sure that when we put that upper body on, that it's going to sit perfectly how we want it to look and not leaning to a side, forward, or backwards. So you can see while I'm doing this, it's a lot of dry fitting, it's a lot of adjusting, it's a lot of clamping the legs, then taking off the clamp to maybe adjust the knee and bend it a little bit more on one leg to the other to make sure that everything is looking exactly how we want it to look. I will be honest, when it goes to balancing of the hips and making sure that everything is perfectly balanced, these are some of the hardest steps on this entire build. Once we get the legs right, you would think that, okay, everything is perfect from there. Nope, it's trying to make sure we get all that with the hips that really lock it together. So don't be worried if you do this process about 20, 30 times over. Be safe, get it exactly how you think the best that it can be. Take as much time as you need. Once you have the knee positioning exactly how you want it, we're going to take our magic marker and we're going to mark the groove where the lower leg meets the upper leg. And we're going to use that so when we apply the epoxy onto the legs and then reclamp again, that it'll lock in exactly where we want them to be. And again, before applying the epoxy, we're going to take our X-Acto knife and we're going to scruff up the areas that the epoxy is going to be touching, just to make sure it gives that more grasp. Then we're going to apply the epoxy, put the clamp on, let it sit there for about 15 to 20 minutes. While the epoxy to the knees are drying, what we're going to do is we're going to take our carbon fiber rod and we're going to cut 2-inch long pieces, and then we're going to sand down the ends of them to make them nice and smooth. We're going to use these to pin the feet to the ball socket on the lower legs, just to keep that load balancing as strong as possible. We're next going to turn the feet upside down, and we're going to find and center that main little circle section of the foot, and that's where we're going to drill down through, and this is where the pin is going to be going into the foot. Once we have the pinhole for the left foot, I'm going to put it back onto the broken shoulder armor, and I'm going to line it up with exactly how we want it to place, and I'm going to then go through that hole that we drilled straight through down to the shoulder armor. Reason being is we're going to make sure that pin goes through and stays down there to help hold and structure and strengthen the entire base, foot, and leg. Now that the epoxy on the knees are dried, we're going to take the width, which is about 3/4 of an inch, and we're going to cut 2 more carbon fiber poles. What we're going to do here is we're going to put each of these rods through the sides of the knees all the way through to the other side to help strengthen these load-bearing areas. I'm going to then take my drill and go straight through the knee. As you can see here, just because of the odd shape, I am clamping this down to the table to get a firm connection on here to make sure that the leg is not going to move around while I'm doing this drilling. And like before, I'll start drilling in, then I will reverse out, clean out any resin, and then continue my drill. We're then going to mix up our epoxy for 30 seconds and put it onto each of the carbon fiber pins and slide those into the knee areas to make sure that nothing is poking out from either side, but the rods are going straight through the knee. So it's now time to attach the legs to the feet. And the easiest way that I try to do this is by dry fitting and setting up the stance again. And I'll usually put a level on the top of the hips to make sure that everything dry fitted is nice and level the way I want. I'll usually put a stand on the proper length from the ground up onto the hips just to kind of make it a little bit easier of placing things. Then I'll move the feet to where they are, and I will take my drill. You can see here I have my drill with underneath a little notebook. And then I'm able to slightly drill in to hold the legs in place, only into the legs. Now there's a little divot there on the upper leg area that you're going to wind up putting something to cover. So that's the perfect area to start to do your drill in, which will also make for a great area to start with your pin once we get to that point. And once we have that placement, then we can just turn around and use our epoxy, mix them together for 20-30 seconds, and then apply them to both into the foot area and to the ball socket. And you can see once the right leg has finished drying, about 15 to 20 minutes, I turned around, took the drill out, and I did the exact same thing on the left leg standing on the broken shoulder armor of the fallen Titan. With this one, you can tell that I am putting even more epoxy around the area of the foot and not just on the ball joint to make sure that everything is locking in between that shield armor, the foot, and the leg. With both the feet epoxied to their legs, we can now move on to the next step, and that's going to be putting pins in from the feet up to the ankle areas to help with the load bearing and secure these legs to make sure that it will hold the entire mass of the Titan. Now, we've already made holes in the bottom of each of the feet, and we're going to use those as guides. So on our drill bit, I usually will go about 3/4 of an inch, and I will cut 2 carbon fiber rods at 3/4 of an inch and sand those down. I'm going to take the drill and I'm going to drill in from the hole that we made straight up 3/4 of an inch in. And of course, I will be backing out here and there to empty out some of the resin that it collects while doing the drill in and continue to drill on each side. Once we have finished doing the drilling, I will dry fit the rods to make sure that they go in smoothly. And once I know that they are secure, I will take my epoxy, I will mix it again, 20 to 30 seconds, and I will apply epoxy to the first half of the rod and slide the rod all the way up from the feet into the ankle areas. I'll then take my Dremel, and using the sanding pad, I will make sure that there is no part of a peg hanging from the bottom that could cause any issues with the Titan standing, and smooth those down. With pretty much everything pinned and epoxied, we're now on to, I'm not going to lie, the most frustrating part of my first Titan build and this Titan build, and that is getting the legs firmly attached onto the hips and keeping everything balanced. The thing that makes this so difficult, it's not just keeping the legs and hips together because the hips are kind of heavy and make sure everything's connecting properly. It's making sure everything is fully level. You can see I have my level on the top here, and the slightest change when I'm taking things off or taking the base off from underneath can make the level shift so that it's leaning too forward, leaning too back, it might be leaning towards one side or the other, and that will be huge when we start building the top of the Titan body and everything else. It will literally make the Titan look like it's leaning, and not only that, it'll put too much pressure on a certain leg or something that could cause damage down the road. So once I figured that I had everything leveled off and balanced and had the clamp on and my level looked good, I decided it was time to bust out the epoxy and put this all together. One important step that I want to make sure you guys fully are aware of are there are 2 coupler rings that go around the ball socket joints before the legs go on. Do not get any type of epoxy or glue on them. Make sure they're there ahead of time and make sure that they spin easily after you glue everything together, because you will be putting your pistons against those. And with resin, the rule of cool is always dry fitting. Did I mention dry fitting? Because it's dry fitting. And when you think you're ready, dry fit it again. Now you might be asking yourself, why did Jeff bring up dry fitting yet again in this spot? Kind of an odd place. Well, you're about to find out. I'm applying my epoxies, and you'll see another set of hands, and that would be my brother-in-laws who happen to be around. because I was having a hell of a time trying to get all of this to stay centered and leveled. After dozens of attempts at what it felt like a race against the clock, I was finally able to get the clamps on everything tight and secure and level off everything so that it was perfectly even front to back, left to right. The applied pressure from the clamps did make the stance go a little bit more extreme, but I actually really liked the way it came out, and luckily everything came off nice and level. With the legs and hips epoxied together and everything looks great, we can now move forward with pinning these last areas and making sure that everything is as strong as possible. So what we're going to do is the leg areas that we already started to drill in to hold the legs to the ball sockets, we're going to follow those lead holes, and we're going to drill in an inch length from the existing holes into the ball sockets. We're then going to take and cut 2 carbon fiber rods and sand them down, put epoxy on the first half of each of these rods, and slide them all the way into the holes there. With a bit of the remaining epoxy, we can now use these 2 covers that go on each of the dimples on the upper legs that'll cover the areas that we drilled in and put the rods. And it's finally time to attach the pistons from the legs to the piston ring. So you might need to cut some of these piston rods to make them fit, but remember, we did not glue that piston ring around, so you can adjust and put each of the pistons to line up properly. The 2 larger pistons always line at the bottom of the hips to the leg, and the others can go on however you want. Again, you can make this look a little bit more dynamic by spinning the ring a little bit to make the pistons go at an angle, or try to keep them all even and level. And there you have it. A fully built Chaos Warlord Titan set of legs in an aggressive action pose. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you're able to take something in one of your next resin builds. And like I always say, Grim for the Grim Rosaline.